So, uh, today I'm going to look at the Guermantes Way, the third book in Marcel Proust's Remembrance of Things Past, or In Search of Lost Time, as his translation has it that I'm reading this time through. Now, I say this time through. Well, this is as far as I have gotten, really, in the novel, and this is roughly halfway through. Um, it's roughly more or less 3,000 pages long, and each of the first three books is about 500 pages. So this is about halfway through. Now, prior to this current reading, I had made it just briefly into the fourth book, but not really. I set it down after about maybe, I don't know, 100 pages or so, and then actually the reason why I quit reading it wasn't because I was uninterested or that sort of thing, but I actually misplaced the book. I had a two-volume copy. This had book 1 through 3, which I'd read entirely, and this had books 4, 5, and 6, and 7. And I just started this one, and somehow or another managed to misplace it, and never could find it. I'm not really sure what happened to it. I don't often misplace books, despite having so many books. Sometimes I put them in an unusual place, and it takes me a little while to find them. But I very rarely actually, lose a book. So I don't really know what happened. But anyway, it disappeared. And so for years I didn't read Proust, and then came back to this again. Okay, so now, third book, The Guermantes Way. Now, if you recall, the first one, Swan's Way, was about what's called the Méséglise Way, the way, I guess, of, I might call, in this case, Swan falls in love with a woman of low character, a coquette, a former prostitute, Odette. And he marries Odette and has this child, Gilbert, who becomes one of the main character's first loves, becomes his first love, becomes his first sexual encounter as well in the second book. And this causes Swan to lose a lot of face because he has married down. Okay. And so that's basically what's going on in the first book. And in the second book, In Search of Young Girls in Flower, is, I guess one could say, is kind of about the main character's, real sort of sexual awakening. It's where his first sexual event happens with Gilbert, which is a sort of mutual masturbation thing. And then he visits a brothel, and he starts to learn about the sexuality going around him. And he has I mentioned before, kind of creepiness, and I think that the more I read this, the more I'm getting a sense of the creepiness of the main character, and I wonder if it's supposed to be there. Now, currently, I'm reading the fourth book, but I'm talking about the third, but I'm reading the fourth book. And I have to say that there is, I'm beginning to see a distinct lack of what one might call any sort of moral concern. Now, I don't mean, a kind of moralistic kind of preachiness. That's not what I mean. I just mean that when something negative happens in the book, it's not usually depicted as a moral failing or somebody doing bad or evil. It's somebody doing something that is socially disadvantageous. And that is the overriding concern here. So there's almost, I would argue, almost a sociopathic kind of approach to relationships here. And the third book is no different. The third book, The Guermantes Way. Now, the Guermantes, and I remember the Méséglise was, back in the day, the upper middle class kind of way, and then the Guermantes Way was the minor nobility. They're not royal, but they are the nobility of the novel, the back in the feudal day, they would have been the lords and those sorts of things. And so the Duke and the Duchess and the Princess of Guermantes and all of that. Now, there are a plethora of names of people, most of which I am not going to remember real well. But essentially, this book has 3 sections. The first book is that the main character goes to visit his friend, Robert St. Loup, at his barracks, where he is stationed. And then the second part of the book is one rather lengthy party that he goes to with the Guermantes, and then there's a brief little bit of interlude between that and the next bit. And in that interlude, he has a kind of strange conversation with Monsieur de Charlus. And then there's a second party of the Guermantes, and then a second kind of weird interaction with Monsieur de Charlus. And then there's a little sort of almost like a coda added to the end, where we find out where Swann comes back into the picture. And at this point, Swann is dying. And Swann does not die. He lives on to the next book, but he is dying in this book. And the overwhelming thing that's talked about throughout the entire book is, even more so than in the first book and the second book, is Dreyfus and the Dreyfus affair. Swann is Jewish, and that's been mentioned a couple of times, and anti-Semitism has been mentioned a couple of times. And apparently within this world, being anti-Semitic was not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, there are many people who are very proudly anti-Semitic and call themselves anti-Semites. I think I covered this briefly, but basically Dreyfus was a Jewish officer who was accused of treason. And modern understanding, modern interpretations, looking back at the evidence, Dreyfus was clearly innocent. In fact, the evidence against him was not only manufactured, but was, even at the time in which it happened, known to be manufactured. And there was even someone else who they knew was in fact the traitor, but he was kind of shuffled aside and quietly retired out of the way, and all the opprobrium of this treasonous act was placed on a completely innocent man simply because he was Jewish. And why? Well, in history, it was because of a kind of respect for the army that was overwhelming. The army was seen as this great French institution. And I guess this goes back to their successes in the Napoleonic Wars and that sort of thing. Because most recently, they'd just been completely destroyed and humiliated against Germany/Prussia in the Franco-Prussian War. So I'm not really sure why, but there was still just a great prestige in the military at the time. And when Dreyfus was at first accused, all of these very high-ranking military people came down against him. And because of that, it became a matter of pride in France and pride in the military to support these people and to be what's called an anti-Dreyfusard. So that's what's going on. A lot of that is going on in this book. So the first bit where we see Robert St. Loup, what we learn a lot more about his relationship with Rachel. Rachel is Jewish. She is a prostitute, possibly a lesbian, possibly involved in a lesbian relationship. I can't really remember exactly. And you'll see that this is not necessarily critical, as we'll find out more about Loup later on, St. Loup. St. Loup is the son excuse me, or the nephew of the Guermantes. And it's through St. Loup that the main character starts to gain access to the Guermantes and gets invited to this party. Now, the first party he goes to is a party of the Duchess, and he goes there, and there's all of this just social maneuvering back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Okay, and then he has his weird thing with Monsieur de Charlus. Now, Monsieur de Charlus is the brother of the Duke of Guermantes, who is obviously the wife of the Duchess. I mean, the husband of the Duchess, excuse me. And he just tells the main character, hey, I will be your mentor. I will teach you the way to be and these kind of things. I'll help you in society, and it'll be a great advantage to you. And really, I don't want to do this. Really, it's, so he's an annoying character, honestly. He's a really freaking annoying character. He's a little older, he's pudgy, he's completely, utterly full of himself. He is proud as the day is long, to the degree of being a prick, really. And, okay, so that happens, and then the second party happens. This party's at the Princess of Guermantes. Now, as I was reading it, it seems like there's several different people over time that have been called the Princess of Guermantes, and so I couldn't keep them straight. I just know that there's different in prestige between these two characters. In the second party, it's pretty much the same as the first one, as far as just people maneuvering, and Proust just making fun of everybody. And it really is kind of this self-involved, self-indulgent narcissism that the main character feels above it all. He feels above it all. And the main character is he's a writer who isn't writing. So everybody's asking him basically how they want to know how his novel's going or how his writing's going. Of course, he's not producing a damn thing. All he's doing is reading a bunch and just obsessing, if this book is to be believed, obsessing about everybody's sex lives, pretty much, and about, social relations and just a whole bunch of nonsense about, where people are in society and all this stuff, and all kinds of observations about how to advance in society and all, and just a bunch of social garbage, really. Okay, and then the second moment with Monsieur de Charlus happens. In the second moment, the main character goes to Monsieur Charlus' house at 11 o'clock after this party with the Duchess. And party with the princess, and he doesn't really want. Well, does he want to go or does he not want to go? I don't know, but he goes, and he's put off for about 45 minutes waiting in this room, which is green. I'm not sure if that matters, but it's green, and we find out later that Charlus takes great pleasure in his green room. So anyway, so after he's there for a while, then the main character goes and sees Monsieur Charlus, who yells at him and is just a complete just prick, because he thinks that the main character is slandering him. Now at this point, it doesn't really say what the slander is, what the story is that the main character is supposedly spreading. We will find out in the next book, which is called Sodom and Gomorrah, that what is being said is that Monsieur Charlus, what he is accusing the main character of spreading is the rumor that he is engaging in homosexual activity. And we'll find out in the next book what's going on with that. But at this point, it doesn't really say that that's what's going on. And the main character seems mystified at what's going on because, at least in what we have seen exhaustively of him and engaging in these parties and other things, he has not been talking about Monsieur Charlus' sexuality, and it hasn't really come up much. In fact, sexuality in general hasn't come up, not in terms of gay, straight, but, anyway. And then this ends with them sort of reaching a little bit of, I don't know what you want to call it, a rapprochement of some sort, a kind of slight, okay, we're okay with each other kind of thing. And then, a couple of months later, he gets a note inviting him to a party. Oh, I'm sorry. These two parties in this book are both at the Duchess, because it's a party for the first time to the princess's party. And so he goes to the Duchess and says, "Hey, is this real? Have I really been invited to the princess?" And they, for some reason, the main character has the belief that this could be a prank that's being played on him. And there's no particular reason why it should be a prank, but he believes it could be a prank. And it seems like later on, when he actually shows up at that party at the beginning of the fourth book, that maybe it was a prank, but it doesn't really matter because anyway. But that's a whole other story. In any case, the Duchess and the Duke just start lying through their teeth about everything, about where they're going, what they're doing. There's a relative of the Duke's that's dying, and the Duke is trying to avoid hearing about that so he can go and enjoy his pleasures and go to these parties and this sort of thing. And it's just a bunch of nonsense. And then Swan shows up, and then Swan is dying, and you know, and the Duke again is trying to avoid hearing about Swan dying because he doesn't want to have anything to do with, having to grieve and that kind of thing. He wants to go have his pleasures and this kind of thing. And I think that's the main thing going on here. Okay, so what's going on here is these are despicable people. These are, proud, arrogant, full of crap people. And there's just no two ways about it. They're just awful, awful, awful people. There's no moral center of any kind. There's no concern for the goodness or doing the right thing about anything. They're, some of them are constantly on the prowl. Like both the Guermantes, both the Duke and the Duchess have lovers openly and also kind of on the down low at the same time. It's kind of weird. It's just really messed up, and but not in a kind of overt, kind of terrible way. It's more just kind of like all of these people are completely and utterly fake. They're just completely fake. And the main character, he's the one who can see through it all, but he's also just as fake as all the rest of them, and he's practically a sociopath in the way that he relates to things. So yeah, I get that this is an important book, and it is an interesting book, and all of that. But there's nobody likable here. These are all awful, awful, awful people. Now, we find out later that there is a lot of subtext going on, a lot of stuff going on under the scene, under the surface, and perhaps the main character has been lying to us all along about all kinds of things. We get the first hints of that kind of thing here, but in the next book, we're really going to see that the main character may not be reliable about anything. Okay, and this gets down to some of what's going on here in terms of psychology. This is written very much under the umbrella, a sort of a Freudianism, a kind of, the id, the ego, and the superego. Now, the id is the part of the body, the part of the mind that just, seeks pleasure. Just seeks pleasure, seeks to eat, seeks to have sex, seeks to drink, seeks to, whatever fires the dopamine, whatever gives you pleasure, boom, id. It has no boundaries. It has, no qualms, no conscience of any kind. It just wants what it wants. And that's pretty much, I think, that's what we're seeing here a lot of times here. The ego is, the part of the self that kind of, regulates some of that and tries to fit it into society and say, well, I can't really go around killing people because, it's not socially acceptable. I got to find the right way to kill people, which, you could argue that's one of the ways in which war comes about is it gives people who want to go kill, the license to go and kill. And of course, all these sexual assignations and all of this is related to that in terms of the sex, the gluttony at these parties, going to eat just whatever you want to eat. Like the pedophores are mentioned all the time, how wonderful the pedophores are. You know, Nobody eats in excess. These people are addicted to, social nonsense is what they're doing, just going around talking about social nonsense all the time. But that's what the ego is, and the superego is the conscience. The superego is the part that definitely says, "Hey, hey, 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 these are the rules of society," and that's really the what they're doing in the party is kind of that is the superego, and so this is the id. That comes to the party, and the id just wants to screw everything, wants to eat everything, wants to, do whatever. And the social ego is saying, the super ego is saying, no, 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 abide by these social rules. These social rules are stupid and arbitrary and dumb and make no sense. And the ego is caught in between between these two warring factions. Some psychologists will tell you, both in Freudian psychology, both the id and the superego are really, really, really stupid, and this is true. They have no intelligence about the way they handle things. All the intelligence, all the rationality, all of the ability to think about nuance and gradation and those sorts of things, respect, anything related to being more than just straight drive in the pleasure principle in the part of the id, and in terms of just complete and utter, almost obsessive concern with other people, the superego. Everything else is the ego. And so that's what's going on here, and it's just a mess. But I think I will have to come back to this next time.